last time, I'm going to make. Call the meeting to order. And Isabel, could you please call the roll?
Yes. So Member Beal?
Here.
Member Deal?
Here.
Member Grossman?
Here.
Member Kaludi?
Here.
And Chair Marks.
Here. So I'm going to start the meeting out by reading an announcement. We want the meeting to go as smoothly as possible and for everyone who wants to speak to have a chance to speak. We don't want anyone to feel intimidated or to feel that their comments are less valuable than anyone else's comments. So I wanted to review the rules of procedure and order for public meetings. These have been established for the City of Albany. And copies of this information are available on the table in the back of the room. The City Council established these rules in order to help ensure a public meeting forum that's respectful to all attendees. As a reminder, disrupting the orderly conduct of the meetings will not be tolerated. This includes applause, shouting, boos or hisses, creating or participating in a physical disturbance, speaking out of turn, preventing or attempting to prevent others who have the floor from speaking, preventing others from observing the meeting, entering into or remaining in the area of the meeting room that is not open to the public, or approaching the commission without consent. If necessary, I would call for a recess to help maintain order and decorum and or ask for removal of disruptive attendees. So we're asking you not to applaud. We want everyone to feel like their comments are welcome here. And so sometimes when you applaud, it makes others feel that if they have a differing view that they can't voice their opinion. We sincerely appreciate your attendance. I'm glad to see that so many of you are here and participating in the meeting and want to make sure that it's run in an orderly manner and provides equity and respect for all attendees. So I want to go through what the agenda is going to be for the meeting. So the item will be introduced and a report received by the commission. The commissioners then will ask any questions they have of the report. Then the third part, public comment is taken regarding the agenda item. So members of the public will have up to 2 minutes to address the commission. This is because we have so many people here tonight that wish to speak that we're going to limit the comments to 2 minutes. Speakers are not allowed to yield their time to other speakers. Any questions raised by the speaker may be responded to by the staff liaison, individual providing the agenda report, or a member of the commission upon direction of the chair following the public comment period. So there won't be a back and forth between the commissioners and the speakers. We'll do our best to write your questions down and respond to them if we have time. Speakers are to address the commission when speaking, so the discussion is not with you and the public, it's with us. We're the ones that will be making the decision. Once speakers have had an opportunity to address the commission, the public comment period will be closed. So public comment will not, be allowed again on that particular topic. So the commission discusses the item and determines if action will be taken. Action is taken via a motion, a second, and then a vote of the commission. So that's the order that we're going in. So I'm going back to the agenda, which looks like this. It's September 1st. That's tonight's agenda. So, but the first thing I want to do is ask for a vote by the commission to change the order of business of one of the topics that's on the agenda. So Bart, do you want to?
Yeah, we would like to deal with the moratorium issue before we get into the rent review issue. Because the moratorium is really about providing space for this conversation to go on and be protected. So we'd like to be able to deal with that first.
Do you want to make a motion to that?
So I move that we change the order to move the rent moratorium ahead of the rent review.
Second.
Okay. So are we ready to vote on that motion? Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Now we're in the approval of minutes. So the minutes were on the back table. It was a one-page sheet that looked like this. I don't know if people had a chance to look at the minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I motion we approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, do you have,
I
yes?
have a comment. I'm not seeing the new item on this agenda, the new item being
Well,
the,
we didn't pass a motion on it. We agreed that we would do that. So that, I think that, well, these are just action minutes, so it was not an action we took, it was discussion that we had. Okay, so are we ready to vote on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes pass. Public comment. This is the part of the meeting, if you wish to address the commission on an issue that is not on the agenda. So we have two items on the agenda. If you wish to address us about an item that's not on the agenda, do we have people, and Isabel will call your name.
Elaine Stelton. Can you please
Could you
come
please,
to...
yeah, could everyone please come to the podium? Thank you. This is so everyone can hear you, and we can, the meeting is so it's accessible to everyone.
I just wanted to state that I'm opposed to rent control, and I wanted to ask the commission.
Okay, excuse me,
Yeah.
you would be out of order because we do have rent control on the agenda.
Okay.
So.
Should I not be speaking now? I thought you said now was the time.
Subject is affordable housing.
So what I wanted to ask the commission is, what percentage of units does the city of Albany provide? What number of units do they manage? What kind of provisions have they made for subsidized housing in the future? You've obviously established that there's a need, so I'm asking you please to recommend to the city council that they make an effort to do something with regard to that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there announcements from committee members?
I would like to.
Yes, okay, Roman?
I wanted to say a general comment to everyone who came and wrote the commission about your thoughts and involvements. And not to get too specific on tonight's topic, but in general, when we hear the community and when you write to us, it's really a great opportunity to hear from you. And on behalf of the commission, we encourage you to keep your involvement up so we can have this level of support and public weighing in for our future issues as well. Thank you.
Brian, you have,
I'll echo those comments because, yeah, this is exactly what we need. We need community participation here in Albany in order to get anything done. My announcement is that starting next week, I'll be taking the Alameda County Civics Academy, which gets into the nuts and bolts of the county government, and I'm hoping that that'll help, will help with the work we're doing in the commission here.
okay. The next order of business are announcements from the staff. Does the staff have any?
Oh, I just want to remind the commission that Linda Gardner, the Housing and Community Development Director, will be making a presentation at the September 19th City Council meeting on the proposed Alameda County bond measure, housing bond measure, affordable housing bond measure.
Okay, great. are no presentations tonight, so we're now in unfinished business, and we've changed that order of business, so we will be talking about the moratorium. There was a subcommittee made up of Brian and Bart, so do you want to present your...
Yeah, I'll present initially, and then Brian can weigh in. I want to share a little bit of the rationale, because some of the conversation that's gone on before really deserves to be repeated, because there are people here tonight that weren't here before. The city of Albany, like most communities in the San Francisco Bay Area, is experiencing a rapid rise in the cost of rental housing. About half of all Albany residents live in rentals. That's always a surprise to people, but that's true. Between 2000 and 2012, median rents in Albany increased by 65%. Rents increased an additional 25% between 2012 and 2014, and since 2014, rents have increased by another 14%. So essentially, rents from 2000 to today have increased by 100% in Albany. And the median rent in Albany is now $3,100 a month, which is actually higher than the average rent in the 9 contingent Bay Area counties and in Oakland. At the same time, real median household income in the U.S. between 2007 and 2014 decreased 9.2%. As a result, renters are paying significantly greater percentages of their household income for housing. Renters who pay more than 30% of their income on housing are considered by the federal government to be cost burdened. 55% of renters in Albany pay above 30%, and 48% of renters pay above 35%. About half of Albany households earn less than the local median wage of $72,500, which is also $20,000 less than the Bay Area regional median wage. Approximately 18% of the city households earn less than $25,000 a year. Almost all renters with incomes under $35,000 a year are overpaying for housing. Between 2007 and 2014, as you know, there were no low-income or formally designated affordable units constructed in the city. So that's kind of the background to where we are. So as a result of these drastic increases in rental rates at a time when income has actually declined, and as a result of Albany residents requesting relief from unaffordable increases, the Social Economic Justice Commission has held several public meetings concerning the need for a rent review system in the city. Residents at the meetings reported increases of 40% or more in a single year. Some longtime residents and families with children in Albany schools indicated that they cannot afford the increases, nor can they find alternative affordable housing here, and may be forced to leave Albany. The Commission intends to make recommendations on possible ordinances to the City Council, and that's what we'll be discussing tonight. I'd like to mention one item, because I think there's a little confusion in some of the letters. Under the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, the state set limits on the ability of local governments to regulate rents. Under this law, landlords are permitted to establish initial rent and may adjust the rent following the vacating of a unit by prior tenants. There's no restriction on that. It also exempted single-family houses, condominiums, and units with a certificate of occupancy issued after February 1st, 1995 from local rent control ordinances. So if you're renting something in that category, no rent review, mandatory rent review could play a role for you, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the circumstance. So it is likely that the council will wish to allow ample time for citizen input, discussion, and debate on a rent review ordinance if we propose one. If an ordinance is approved, there's very likely to be a period of planning for the implementation of such changes. There's a very real danger that some landlords may feel that they need at this moment to raise rents immediately because they've heard that there may be rent restrictions in place. And it's important that, that we have protection so that this conversation can go on without that danger over people's heads, and with everyone to understand that no decision will be made. All we will do tonight, by the way, is make recommendations to the council. That's the only authority we have. We can't make final decisions on any of these matters. As we did some research on rent review, we discovered that other local cities that have considered changes in rental regulation, most notably Alameda, Oakland, and Santa Rosa, have responded to the danger of accelerated rental increases by imposing a rental moratorium. And so we are going to recommend to the Commission tonight, through this report, which is available in the back, that we develop a moratorium while this conversation continues and until it comes to an end and something is implemented or not. There's information in the report about what other municipalities have done. What we've come up with is a kind of, I think, a simple, straightforward approach to a rental moratorium. We would recommend that a rental moratorium should be imposed to take effect immediately and shall last for 90 days. So this is not an open-ended, ongoing moratorium. This is a brief moratorium to allow for a period of discussion. The council can extend that moratorium for up to 60 days. So the moratorium could only last for a period of 5 months. And that's only if there's needed additional time to complete work on a rent review ordinance or plan implementation of a council-approved ordinance if one should be passed. Because if something is passed, it'll obviously take time for staff to figure out how to implement it. Secondly, from the effective date of the ordinance, no owner or manager of a rental not exempt by Costa-Hawkins may impose a rent increase of more than 3% during the moratorium period. So within 12 months, if there's already been a rent increase imposed of more than 3%, there couldn't be any further rent increase during that 12-month period. And also, landlords will be barred during this period from undertaking eviction actions except for just cause. And just cause is defined in the documents. Failure to pay rent, illegal activity, violation of terms of existing lease, matters of that sort represent just cause for an eviction. We think that the moratorium being a time-limited action that would protect tenants from increases imposed while a rent review policy is under consideration would be an effective step to allow the council to move forward. The 3% permitted increase is actually about twice the cost of living increase in this year. A moratorium will allow full discussion and debate on rent review issues and provide city staff with time to take necessary actions to put a process in place or not if one is not passed. We believe a moratorium will relieve some of the anxiety that many Albany renters are now experiencing as they anticipate rent increases with no local ordinance of any type in place. And that is basically what we're proposing, a simple, brief period of moratorium while the conversation about an ordinance proceeds. You want anything, Brian?
Yes, I'll add a few things. So the first, why are we talking about this, right? And that is the impact of rising rents on the community. I'd like to talk a lot about how it's our responsibility here on the commission to serve the whole community. It's not just about one group or another group. And I think there's a tendency to look at these things from a single person perspective, that this person has the option to do that. And what captivates me about this issue is the impact on the entire community, on how we're looking at people that are paying over 50% of their income on rent, and if the landlord increases that by a significant percentage, well, how long before it reaches 100%? And what are their options? Their options are to leave Albany. And that's bad for our community. And and just in terms of what families need, you need to be able to keep your children in the same school. If you're hopping from city to city to city chasing lower rent, that's not going to work. So, and then in terms of what it's going to do to our community, this robs us of our ethnic diversity and of our, there's an age issue. So if you look at our commission here, 3 of us are retired. So I've gotten the feedback from my neighbors, well, I'm not going to be able to retire here because it's going to be too expensive. So what's going to happen 10 years from now if there are no seniors in Albany? Who's going to serve on these commissions to serve the community? So that's the impact. So in terms of what we're looking at, we've gotten a number of letters, and this gets more into the next topic. So obviously, you know, we appreciate landlords' concerns and everything. This is just to give us time to discuss the issue. I think there's plenty of room for adjustment from the city council, maybe in terms of the amount. What is the point that this kicks in? Is it 3% or is it some other percent? I'm certainly fine with it being a larger percentage. In terms of the timetable, like maybe one thing that's pretty obvious is this is falling right around the holidays when maybe the council isn't going to be in session. So I think those are going to be things they can discuss. But I think this is a top priority to kind of stop the bleeding while we have this discussion. And one thing that's clear to me from the comments we get is that there's I think people talk amongst each other, and there's sometimes kind of a paranoia that's probably building among landlords and we're not talking about rent control. We're not talking about a cap on rents. We're talking about simply having a process where people can talk things over, and that we can provide some sort of help for people. So those were my comments.
Are there commission members? Yes,
I have
Roman.
some questions. When you say that council may extend the moratorium for 60 additional days, is this a one-time only thing, or can it be every?
Our recommendation would be a one-time only thing.
Okay. And there-
Council, of course, can do what it wants, but yeah.
Yeah. So should we also recommend a sunset clause just in case?
Well, I think that's our intention. There will be an ordinance drafted by staff that will specify that.
I just would hate to have this issue swept under the rug while.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think it's clear that our intention is not an open-ended moratorium. It's a very time-limited thing.
Okay. And
Go ahead.
one last question. For the Costa Hawkins rental housing exemptions, do you have a figure of how many percentage of renters are exempted?
Is Jeff?
He just stepped out.
I think my understanding is about a third of our rental market is single-family homes and condominiums. Is that so? Is that
At
nice?
the
Yeah.
data from the housing elements, it's 1,000 are single-family homes and 2,700 are apartments.
Okay.
So
Roughly, 15% of our renters. Yes.
So I had a couple of questions. First of all, under recommended moratorium, the second page, the middle paragraph under that heading, there's a comment or a statement about Alameda's moratorium. It says the ordinance would take place into account any previous increases within 12 months. Now, does that imply that the ordinance would be retroactive?
No. It begins on the day that it passes. It's not retroactive. But what it does do is it says if you've already had a rental increase that exceeds the allowed amount, there couldn't be an additional increase.
I've actually got some comments from the public asking that we consider retroactive through, starting in June when we began our hearings.
I don't know that that would be legal.
They've done
Does
it in
staff have a
other
comment? Or
cities.
that would be an ex post facto law, wouldn't it?
I am not familiar with a municipality doing it that way. I'm not an attorney, so I'd have to
I
consult.
think the city of Alameda made it retroactive for certain.
Okay.
But I don't think it's retroactive in Alameda. I think it began the day
Well,
it
there-
passed. I guess it's in effect retroactive if you say you've already raised rents. You can't do more rent raising.
No, when they were going through the process, I'm not saying now, there's nothing now going back retroactive, but when they
yeah.
were going through the process, they did.
The moratorium was
Yes.
retroactive.
Okay, well, the ones I've seen have begun at the date that they were passed, but do cover the 12 months preceding in terms of whether there's already been an increase.
Okay, sorry, another, about the extension of the moratorium, and Isabel and Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a meeting with them and we talked about the timeline for implementation and what it would include, like our meeting today. Presentation to the city council is planned for September 19th. There would probably be another discussion at their next meeting, October 4th. Then there would be more process, and then hopefully by January 17th, the staff would be able to present to the city council what they had developed.
I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that schedule. We're not on the calendar right now for the September city council meeting, and there's a lot of work to do, so I wouldn't put any particular dates out there. This is a high priority, and we'll work very hard on it. But I can't say that we're going to have this completed by January.
Okay, so then that brings me to the question about creating another type of extension system, because we're not going to have enough time to complete the process within that 5-month period.
And this does get back to what I was saying earlier about the way the 90 days kind of falls around the holidays. So it might be worthwhile to think about, it being a different, of course, the city council can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
This is just an initial recommendation of the 90 days, but I think we don't want it to fall in the end of December. Yeah.
I think that's,
Well, maybe what we want to do is stipulate that the council decide on what the appropriate interval is in terms of their need. And this may simply be a suggestion.
right, maybe we can, a lot of times they ask for options, and we
Yeah.
could provide them with a couple
Sure, we can do that.
options.
So just to clarify, is the proposal that the 90 days, or I should say, I'm assuming that the 90-day clock starts when the council adopts the ordinance?
Yeah,
So depending on when the council takes action, it's not going to take action tonight. You're not the city council, so it wouldn't take effect in December under any circumstances.
I think we would hope that they would make it a top priority. But yes, I think it should be sometime in January, from my perspective.
well, we could simply add, in terms of this proposal, we could simply add a sentence saying that council should consider an appropriate interval if this seems inadequate.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay?
Are there any other commission members with comments? Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the public, and Isabel has the speaker card. So once again, if you wish to speak on the moratorium only, please fill out one of these cards and give it to Isabel so you can have your opportunity to speak. So do you want to?
Okay, so I'll call 3 names at a time, and you can come and line up against the wall over there. So first speaker is Ed Crowley. Second is Clifford Fried. And Teresita Zaragoza.
So you have two minutes. I'm sorry, I just want to
Yeah,
remind you.
I don't know if I'm going to finish in 2 minutes. So the timeliness of the moratoriums appears to have passed. Rents have stagnated and softened the past few months. Owners who intend to rent at top market rates have already done so, and it's really too late to roll those back. The City of Albany was founded because it didn't want to be Berkeley. Don't let rent control turn Albany into Berkeley. Be careful what you ask for because you might get it. The median rent figures in your analysis are skewed way high. You quote, in the report, it quotes numbers like $2,500 or over $3,000 for median rent. Anybody can go to Craigslist over the last several months and you can see what rents are. 1 bedroom's around $1,850, 2 bedrooms around $2,450. The average is nowhere near way over $2,500 or over $3,000 as quoted in the report. And we're only talking about units that would be subject to rent control that really you should be concerned about because they're the only ones you really can control. And those units tend towards the lower end because they're older buildings. Even if the numbers are accurate, rent control won't do much because it only applies to a minority of rental units. Many owners have already raised rents to market levels and it's pretty clear that they've plateaued, like I said. Who are you to say what percentage of rent people should be paying out of their incomes? What percentage of their income? People make consumption choices all the time. Why should I be forced to lower my rent so they can buy a new car if they choose to make that kind of consumption choice? In rent control, people make lots of money and stay in their rent-controlled apartment for years and years and years. Why? Not because they can't afford not to, but because it's too good a deal to leave. The 3% number that you guys quote, I don't know where it comes from, but our rents are more than $500 per unit below market on 6 of our 7 units. Why should I be limited to a 3% increase when somebody's already jacked their rents up to market, get the same 3%, and their 3% is more than the amount I can raise?
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Clifford Fried. I moved to Berkeley, California in 1977 when I became a student there. And one of the first events in Berkeley was a gentleman with a clipboard came up to me and said, "Do you want your rent to go up?" I said, "Absolutely not." So I signed his petition. I moved out of Berkeley 4 years later. The man with the clipboard still lives in Berkeley. Rents have skyrocketed in Berkeley. That petition that I signed, the rent ordinance that passed in Berkeley, did absolutely nothing to protect tenants from increased rents. And now my children cannot afford to live in Berkeley. So much for the good of rent control. I am an advocate for property owners, the people who built those buildings that are in the Great Seal of the City of Albany. And I'm an advocate for property owners. When I hear words like, we need a moratorium so we can have a discussion, so we can have a conversation, that's code for we are going to pass a rent control law and it's going to become permanent. There's no discussion or conversation. It will happen. It's going to happen if there's a discussion. As far as a moratorium goes, there's no such thing as a moratorium. The legislation in Santa Monica that became rent control in Berkeley and San Francisco was all emergency legislation. That became permanent. So the people here in this audience need to know that this moratorium, it's not true. It will become permanent once it's in place because you can't withdraw rent control. All you could do is keep adding on to it. The stats that were quoted by Commissioner Grossman, they don't sound correct to me. I think the rents he's talking about, rent increases going up, are on empty units, vacant units, which are decontrolled under Costa-Hawkins. I think a proper study needs to be done as to tenants in place and how much their rent has increased. And by the way, Costa-Hawkins will do nothing to control evictions on single-family homes. Single-family homes will be regulated under any new rent control scheme or moratorium, and that should be a serious concern for the owners of single-property homes. Thank you.
Can I just as a point of information, these numbers come from the Alameda County Community Development Agency.
Order,
Okay,
order.
please, yeah, let's continue, please. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Teresita Zaragoza. I don't speak for anyone but myself, but when I look behind me, there's also other people behind me. I'm a tenant in Albany for 3 years, and the last 2 years, my rent increased $425. Now it's $2,000. It used to be $1,575. And I speak on the issue of moratorium because I think that's a way to equalize the playing field. Because a moratorium is a way to look at the problem, you stop, and you recognize and be aware, and be reasonable in discussions of what it is. When the gentle Mr. Beal talked about diversity in Albany and what's the good for everybody. And I'm kind of intimidated by the two previous speakers because they've had history of being on the top. And when I was working, and I'm not now retired, I used to be in the middle, not minding my own business. But now that I'm retired and very limited income, it's very difficult that you work hard and find yourself not having choices to where you live. And I think I like the position that you took, that families with children should not go look for low rental so the children could move to another school. And I think in the whole society's health benefit, that the future generation, and that's my hope. I used to work for Congressman Dellums for 16 years, and I always think of the children because we live our future for the children. And if they can't afford housing, we're going to have a lot of homeless people in the street, not by choice, but because of how we've dealt with societal impacts. So a moratorium for me shows a sign that we are serious. Whether it goes to rent control board or whatever it is, it's a very one positive step forward for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speakers, Peng Kao, Wayne Shipman, and Dean Appius. Appelis. Okay, sorry.
Hi, my name is Peng Kao, and I'm a property owner in Albany. I own 2 small apartment buildings, and I have 2 comments about this rent increase moratorium. One is the data source. I'm really surprised by this median rent in Albany of $3,100, which I think is way too high because on any rental ad list, like Craigslist, you can see that for $3,100 you can rent a single family house here, like 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house here. And so majority of the rental units, those 1-bedroom apartments, 2-bedroom apartments, those the rent is way lower, much lower. And so I would like to see the data that shows the median rent for the 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, and those apartment buildings, because the single-family house are exempted according to that law. So it won't be affected by any rent regulation. A second comment I have is about this percentage of rent increase during this rent increase moratorium period. It's 3%, which I think is really low because based on my experience, the maintenance cost and utility cost has increased quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years. For the maintenance cost, I'm looking at 50% increase. on my building. So I think this 3% increase per year will not make up for the cost increase for the property owners. So I would like the commission members to take into account this concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Bond, Madam. Bart, I noticed that you smiled when you mentioned the exemption for single-family dwellings from Costa-Hawkins, and I don't take your humor. This is the beginning of rent review taking over how independent small business operators in Albany who own single-family houses share a condominium or share a duplex, manage their own retirements, manage their own income streams with tenants that they have chosen, tenants that have agreed to a tenancy and a rate of pay commensurate with the desire to live in Albany. Your heavy hand is not needed. The outside influences from others outside of Albany who have their own social experiments to run do not belong in Albany. We do not welcome this. I have watched how this starts in other communities across the country. I was there in Silver Spring. I was there in Boulder, Colorado, where your actions started the consumption of their children in terms of rental markets. You should not go down this path.
Thank you.
My name is Dean Appenese. I've been a landlord with my family in Albany for over 40 years. Just commenting on the moratorium only, I recommend that you deny that, based solely upon landlords are always subject to constant capital improvements that need to come up time to time. This kind of situation comes up, I'm restricted now to paint my whole building, put a new roof on and on and on. So you're just putting the slam to the people that have put in this community over the years, worked hard, want to retire here also, and have their own retirement viable. That's all my comments on this one issue.
Thank you.
Sarah Sunstein, Madhavi Rathod, and BJ Thorns.
Wrote a few notes here. I'm Sarah Sunstein, live in Albany, and as I said at the last meeting of this commission, I had received an illegal notice for rent increase. It was close to a third of my rent. They have yet to figure out how to give me a legal increase, which is nice. But I'm more than disturbed to hear that a rent increase moratorium does not apply to single residences. The owner of my building, of my little tiny house, owns at least 15 properties. They're a big real estate mogul. I should say at least 15 properties in Albany and maybe a few in Berkeley. So the fact that I live in a single residence, it's not like the owner moved out and is renting it. I'll be leaving Albany whenever it is that they figure out how to give me the rent increase. So if there's any way to help those of us who do live in condominiums or single residences that are owned by conglomerations, I would like to hear it and see it passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Madhavi Rathod, and I'm an advocate for some of the residents over at 404 Stanage. They recently had a new landlord, Mr. Cow, who just spoke a few minutes ago, and he said he had 2 small units which he purchased. Well, subsequent to his purchasing the units, what he did is he instituted a 60% raise for these units. They went from paying $14.80 to $20.35, and it's created a great financial hardship for the residents there. One of the units that he gave 1 month's notice to had someone in their 80s living there. Another unit had a person in their 90s living there who was a financial dependent on a child, and that person had been living there for over 25 years, and they've had to run and find new places to live, and it's been a great financial hardship and burden. And Mr. Cow's residence is a Union City address, so he is not a resident of the East Bay at all, and so we're not benefiting from him living here. And I really, request that the board review the moratorium and take action, because this is creating such a great financial hardship for all of the residents there, and it's really unfair, and we would like, all those people that cannot afford to move to somewhere so quickly to be given another opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I use her time? Just kidding. I'm going now. I'm BJ Thorsness. I live in El Cerrito. I used to live in Albany. I've been a landlady for almost 45 years, and I've been a good landlord, really good. And I've kept rents down for people who need it, like single parents. I have one down now. I have an 87-year-old woman whose rent I've never raised, and I never will. And I can only hope she doesn't outlive me, but she could. I'd like to say that I believe if you checked, and especially checked your small-time landlords, your mom and pop, which is maybe 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, you will find many of them who have worked for many years like me, because we want to retire too, and we want to have Christmas too, by the way. They're not rich, as people assume all landlords are, and they're not all greedy, like the Chronicle tells you every day. That's not the case that happens. And I'd like to tell you what happened to me. 2 weeks ago, I became a landlady in Albany for the first time. 2 weeks ago. I've already put $30,000 into the foundation of a building that was crumbling on Solano Avenue. It has 2 units and a retail, right? And I will be putting about $35,000 more in to save this building with rotten windows. It's been totally unmaintained. The rents are very, very low there. I've worked with the tenants. One of them's been there 20 years. There's no way that tenant's going to go. I'm going to take care of those tenants somehow. But when you talk about the rents and raising it 3%, you're talking about raising it 3% of a rent that's way, way, way below market. And in about 3 or 4 months, I'm going to have to start paying back some of the money that I have borrowed to do these repairs, to save this building, to make it earthquake retrofitted, all those things, so it's a good building. So you need to realize that you are putting the onus of taking care of everybody's rental issues on one segment of the population, and that is the small-time landlord for the most part, not the big ones with lots of units or the towers, because the Costa-Hawkins Act doesn't cover them. It covers only us. One segment. You don't ask the plumbers to lower their rates to us to help. You don't ask the lawyers to lower their rates to renters. You don't ask restaurants to have menus only for tenants to help them out. You ask only us. And I'm not rich. Come to my house and take a look. You'll see. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Sutton, Alexa Hauser, and Julie Wakili Lynch.
Hi, I'm Catherine Sutton, resident of Albany, neither renter nor landlord. I really appreciate the work you're putting into this and the thoughtfulness and all the people who've come with their different points of view, and I see how tricky it is here to balance the needs of people who are genuinely making a living through their rentals and being fair to their renters, and people who maybe don't really have those same, not working on the same scale. And I urge you to keep working on something that will be fair to everybody, and I don't think it's going to be easy, but I just want to reiterate, too, that you're not talking about rent control, and I think maybe people are beginning to get that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Alexa Hauser. I'm an Albany resident, homeowner, and owner of rental property. I support the moratorium. while I know that it feels to many homeowners, landlords, that this is singling them out, currently they're in a completely protected class and get to do whatever they want. So we're looking at a very uneven current state. And to impose a moratorium for a limited amount of time seems to me to be incredibly reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Julie Wakely Lynch. I am the pastor at St. Albans Episcopal Church at Washington and Curtis. I live in El Cerrito, where I am fortunate to be a homeowner. For the 7 years that I have been the pastor at St. Albans, increasingly, and especially in the last couple of years, the number one concern that both members of the parish and members of the community that come to me bring to me is their incredible stress about trying to afford to live here. And I have in my parish people who are landowners, who are realtors, who are renters, but it's primarily the older people in my congregation, the people on fixed incomes, working families who are just getting squeezed and squeezed. And I'm a founding member of the Diverse Housing Working Group, which I think you all are familiar with. And one of the marks of what I think has helped us to make real progress is that we're a really diverse group of people representing many segments of the community. And we have come together. Every time we meet, we remember that we are coming together even though we have different perspectives and different interests because we're concerned about the lack of affordable housing in Albany. And we've been able to find ways to listen to each other. Catherine just talked a little bit about the importance of fairness, and I just really hope that I support the moratorium because I think it's important to create a space for listening and for real conversation. I think it's important for people to be heard. It's also important for everybody to be able to listen. So I thank you for your good work, and I understand that there are tensions that pull against each other, but I think that we're all here because we love the city of Albany and we want things to be well here for all of its residents. Thank you.
Francesco?
My name is Francesco Papalia. I'm a realtor and I have quite a lot of experience in rent control issues. I'm confused a little bit about the number that you used about rent incomes going down across the nation. I'm sorry, but that's a totally irrelevant fact. The reason why we have a problem here is because incomes have gone up in the Bay Area, because there are jobs that have been created here, and we all know where those jobs come from, the Silicon Valley. That's what's causing the demand and the ability to pay more. But our real problem here is a shortage of supply. It's not greedy landlords, it's a shortage of supply. And until there is a $100,000 to $200,000 to $300,000 shortage of housing in the Bay Area, and that's what we need to address immediately. Not with the moratorium doesn't fix that. So I'm kind of confused. I think that number is irrelevant, and you should not be using it to describe why we need a moratorium. I want to reiterate that moratorium is just rent control by another name. And I'd like you the whole board to tell us, can you cite a single place in the country that started with a moratorium and then it went away? That would be very good to know. I would appreciate to know that, because then we'd all know that it was a possibility. Another thing I'm very concerned about, if you look out here, you're getting more input here than I think you've gotten for the whole time. And I'm afraid that you've already come to a conclusion about this, and I want you to really keep an open mind, or reopen your mind to the fact that what you're going to learn today may change what your decision will be. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Kurz, did you want to speak on this item? Yeah.
Commissioners, people of Albany, thank you for your time and efforts. My name is David Kurtz. I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm very fortunate to be paid more than most of my colleagues and peers because I have a National Science Foundation fellowship, but I still feel the pain of paying around a third of my income price. I was in Albany for a year, now I'm in Berkeley, but I'm actually not here to talk about myself. I'll be fine. I've had a pretty privileged background, and I'm sure I'll figure things out. I'm more concerned with the future of Albany. It's a community I care about a lot and invest in as a member of Solano Community Church and a former resident. And just looking around this room, there are currently 0 black people here, I think. And I just want to kind of point out that when we don't have a diverse community, I think we all lose. And I know that it's hard, and I'm not saying that all the renters have not made good points, but I just want to encourage us to look inside and think that, it's easy to be concerned about our own priorities, but I think when we're really honest with ourselves, the most beautiful existence is being selfless when and where we can be. And I found the most joyful parts of my life have been when I've been selfless. And I just want to paint a picture of what if Albany was a little bit more diverse. I would love fewer white, or not fewer white people, but more people of color, more people from low-income backgrounds, more painters and carpentry workers and stonemasons in our church congregation, for example. I think we have a lot to learn from people with very different backgrounds. And so a moratorium is something I'm very much in support of, just as a way to have the conversation about how to have a more just, diverse, and equitable society, and then to see where that conversation goes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes
the public comment? Okay.
Well, I would ask first to see if there's anybody.
Is there anyone else who wishes? Okay, could you fill out oh, you did?
Oh, did you want to speak on this side?
Oh, okay, please come forward then. I'm sorry, but you're out of order, so I...
Just ask a question, because they're speaking off topic. So are we talking about moratorium or based on...
Well, sir, could you give us your remarks on the moratorium? Yes.
Okay, my name's John Steed, and although I'm sympathetic to people whose rents are going up, I live in a relative's basement because I can't afford to pay the rents. But I also own a duplex here in Albany. I can't afford to live in my own building. The duplex needs about $50,000 worth of repairs. If I'm not able to raise my rents, I will not be able to repair it, and the people will have to move out anyway. Landlords, you have to be able to make some money on the property to repair it, to keep the roofs working, the furnace, the refrigerators, the stoves. You can't pour $100,000 into a property and then expect to get $400 a month from a tenant, and you make, out of that 400, you make 20, and you're going to make all these repairs. Eventually, it starts looking like Berkeley, where you have properties that are run down, paint's falling off, there's holes in the roof, and eventually somebody takes them over, bulldozes them down. A moratorium is going to be the same as rent control, and when you put in a rent control situation, landlords are going to fight to move their rents up as high as they can. My rents are under market, and they've been that way for a long time because the people have kids going to school here, and I feel bad for them. But if rent control comes in, or a moratorium, I'm going to fight as hard as I can to get those rents as high as they possibly can be, because that determines the value of your property. If you have low rents and you decide to move or sell it, you won't get hardly anything for your property. And if they stay that low, your property is worth $500,000 when something the same size next door is worth $1 million. It's so ridiculous, so ridiculous. So once again, if you need to allow landlords to make enough money on the property so they can repair them, so they will be in good, this is a beautiful city, Albany. Good police, good schools, good housing. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the moratorium?
So I have Brian Eddy and Kevin Tannehill.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin Tannehill. I'd just like to say that I think the most important thing when making any decision is probably having accurate information in which to rely on. And looking over this report, I just see a lot of skewed things towards kind of a means to an end. I almost feel like everything's predetermined. Taking national figures and applying them to a city that's unique and different and in the middle of the Bay Area isn't something that's accurate and shouldn't be counted on. When we talk about pay above 30% being a cost burden, in the housing industry, I know the back-end ratios are somewhere in the mid to high 40s just to qualify for loans to buy a house. 30% housing costs in any form of housing now is a thing of the past. It's not realistic. And I would just say that any vote on this, I think, should be postponed until some figures and some data is compiled specific to the city in which the vote is being taken in. And also, I would like to also know if these figures include the village as far as income figures on student housing and rents and so forth as well. I think that's a big segment of what Albany is and a big segment of our individual units. And has an impact on how decisions should be made. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Eddy. Look, we all wouldn't be here if we were talking about reasonable rent increases. That's not what prompted all of this. What prompted all of it was the 20, 30, 40, 50% increases that some people are facing multiple times a year. That is what, there's a gentleman laughing over here. I can't believe that. And that is why we are here. That is the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem isn't us renters not feeling like the landlords have a right to earn their profit. I actually, in a different state, used to actually work for a property management company. I sympathize with the upkeep that it requires for it. I understand that. I get that. But when I'm suddenly socked with a $700 a month increase, like, how is that reasonable? It's not. I can't quickly absorb that. Over a couple of years, yeah, I could probably do that. That's what the moratorium is about. The moratorium is trying to stop that kind of bleeding so that we can figure out what is reasonable or do something. Because if some of the landlords are being greedy and taking advantage of this and raising rents in these egregious amounts, then something needs to be done. Something needs to be done to keep families from being displaced. We've seen dozens of our friends being forced out of Albany, all of them with children, and now mine's next.
Thank you.
Yuva Taladan.
I was here last time, and I thought I'm not gonna speak, but I realized, there's both landlords and renters, and the way the landlords are coming made me really mad. It's like instead of discussing the problem, how we can solve, they're trying to just pinpoint like the data they got from the city council about the rent. That's not the issue. It's about trying to solve it. And I understand landlords need to make money, renters need to stay. So instead of trying to find that, it's like a legal battle. This feels like going to a court, and this shouldn't be a court. And I'm for moratorium.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the moratorium? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Darren Kessler. I lived in San Francisco when I was much younger, and I got booted out by a landlord, even though there was rent control, for some exception that was they found. I moved to Albany. I eventually saved up enough money to buy a property across the street from me. It was it was a beat-up, run-down property. It was a triplex that the only property that I was focusing on, the only property that I was working, that I wanted to deal with. It was going to be for my retirement. I fixed it up. I have tenants in there, some of whom that from over 12 years ago are still there. I keep my rent very low, much lower than the market. I didn't know there was going to be a moratorium when I came here. I was going to talk about something else until I heard about that. And I had been saving to do a major improvement of that property. And I am incredibly concerned about the moratorium because I've also just recently went to Berkeley for my son and looking for properties there, and I could see what was going on there. There is nothing cheap over there. There may be people who are protected that deserve to be protected there, but I could tell you that any rent control that was imposed there is invisible when you're looking for property, and that the things are just absolutely unaffordable. The properties that are there that are being sold are being bought by big companies that have a lot of money, have lawyers, can absorb a lot of the costs that would be involved in fighting rent control and finding exceptions to avoid it and kick people out there and then raise their rents. What I'm suggesting here is that there not be a moratorium. Let the landlords do it. I'm telling you, I represent many people probably here and other people in my neighborhood that are trying to keep their neighborhood nice. I bought this property because it's right across my street. My tenants are my friends, my neighbors, and I want to be able to keep my rents low and keep it nice. And that's not going to be allowed here with the moratorium or what's being proposed here.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to the commission. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So first of all, again, I really want to thank everyone for coming out. And especially, I think we're hearing more from the landlords this time, which was sort of missing from the last discussions we had. And this illustrates why the applause rule is very important, because we do want to hear from everyone. So I think, and it's important for us to all understand there is another side to this. It's not just about the tenants, it's about the landlords as well. And these are people typically, I think, that are, say, middle-class people that have 1 or 2 units. And they themselves have also gotten caught up in the economic changes that have happened since, I think, 2000, since the housing bubble and the deregulation of the mortgage industry has brought about dramatic changes in house prices. So if you happen to be a large landlord that that owns a lot of property and bought it, say, before 2000, you're probably making a very nice profit. On the other hand, if you've come into Albany recently and bought a home, you're going to be having a hard time. And I have one family member once said, if you like headaches, be a landlord. So it's not easy on them too. But I did just want to comment on one of the correspondences we got, and I think a comment someone made here about putting the entire burden on the landlord. So as of now, the burden is on the tenant. The tenants are experiencing very stressful time. They're going to have to change cities, and I don't see that level of impact to a lot of landlords. So we do have to balance that. I think when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of the city council, how they want to word this, maybe there might be some exemptions in there if you're really losing money on a property. But that said, we're not asking for rent control here. We're asking for a period of time to talk about this issue and allow it to go forward. So I don't know. I want to remind everyone of the decorum rules too. So.
Well, my comments are pretty similar to Brian's. There's different situations with the different landlords, and some are mom and pop landlords who are financially stressed as well. And then there are the corporations, or perhaps some landlords who are enjoying a more lucrative income based on their property. So I agree that we might want to take into consideration the individual situations, and that if you've had an opportunity to look at our rent review options, you'll see that those types of things are taken into consideration when it comes to rent review. And then I agree with Brian as well. This is a moratorium on increasing the rent. It's not something that's going to go into effect permanently. It's an opportunity to give us time to talk about the issues and to hear you.
Bart, did you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to move the moratorium report. I'd like to request that the commission refer the report to council for discussion. And I do also want to say that...
Is there a second on that before we discuss it? Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can discuss that.
Okay, so again, I think it's, in terms of the statistics and the concerns about that, the only source of data that we have is the county's information. That's all we've got. Whether it's, if there are inaccuracies in it, there's no alternative in terms of the numbers. I think that that council, what we're saying to council basically is we need time to work on this issue and to come up with an ordinance. I understand the concern that some of you have that this is some kind of a stalking horse for rent control, but please be aware of the fact that we're not proposing rent control. So why would this be a stalking horse for something we're not proposing? We're proposing a rent review ordinance. And I think it's important that council be given the opportunity now to weigh in, to have time to discuss this, and that we have a pause in our process in this community so that we can talk about these things without people being at each other's throats and being desperate for what their survival possibilities are going to be.
Do you wish to speak on the motion, please?
For this, in the moratorium in general, or just this motion?
We're now speaking on the motion.
Okay.
To move it to the city council.
With hearing many of the landowners' fears that this temporary moratorium will become permanent, can we also suggest a sunset clause like mentioned before? Nothing?
Mm-hmm. It's built in.
Yeah, but you said this only suggestion, but a suggestion to the city council, but maybe also recommend, at 1 year, that's the cutoff limit. We can't go past that, just to quell any fears that this may become permanent.
The recommendation is 5 months, not 1 year.
I'm saying, after 1 year.
No, but I'm saying what we're recommending is a 5-month moratorium, nothing longer than that.
You would be recommending an amendment to make it 1 year when right now it's 5 months. I'm just
to not allow it to go beyond 1 year. If the city council wanted to add another 60 days and another 60 days, arguing, debating it and taking into consideration, just so, we can have a time-pressured issue. We don't want this to keep on going.
So you're saying at least 5 months, but not more than 12?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
that's longer.
That's longer than was suggested. Please, please be quiet so we can discuss this. I'm not sure. I mean, that would be an amendment then to what's already on the table.
And this 1 year is just a number, we're setting. We can debate it if it's not or not included at all, but I would like to hear other.
Is there a second to his amendment to change it to no more than 12 months?
I second it.
Okay, so this is an amendment to the motion. So the amendment is that
it wouldn't go beyond a certain amount of time.
12 months. Okay, is there discussion on that?
I just wanted to point out the city council can do whatever they want to. So I don't see much point in this.
Right, we're an advisory body, yeah.
Can we have order in the meeting room?
Maybe, excuse me, maybe it would be helpful if we made it clearer than it is now in the report that the intention here is that this would not go beyond the initial 5-month period. We can simply add the language that says, our recommendation is that the moratorium would end after 5 months at the longest.
My only concern about that is that if the work of the commission's not done in 5 months, then what?
You mean the work of the council?
Yes, and the council, yes.
And the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It doesn't look like it's going to be. January 17th was what we had talked about, but Jeff just mentioned that he expects that the period of time for the process to take place will be longer.
Mm-hmm.
That puts us past the 5 months. So we have to have an opportunity to extend the moratorium.
Could we ask Jeff to comment on this?
I am reluctant to predict how long this is going to take the city council to come to a resolution. It's a complicated issue, as you've heard. There's lots of speakers that have strong opinions about it. I'm expecting that your presentation will go to the city council. They will give you some feedback. You'll probably have some more work that you'll be doing based on that feedback, and then you'll take a final recommendation to them for their formal action. So that back and forth a couple of times, I would expect normally on challenging issues in the city across a whole spectrum of areas, it takes some number of months. Given where we are in the calendar year with the holidays and so forth, I think it's probably not going to be finished by January.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the city of Alameda, I don't remember what their initial moratorium was. I think it might have been 60 days,
Yeah.
45 days. But they extended their moratorium at least twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a stipulation that they would continue to extend it until they had something in place. So but I would propose that we have like 45-day increments of extension. And I like Roman's idea. We could say
No more than 12.
at least 5 months, but no more than 12.
Yes, Brian.
I think we should make our best guesstimate as to how long the city council is going to take, and I think it's not going to happen before the 1st of February, and that should be the initial period that we recommend, and then recommend a 60-day extensions after that, because we don't want to have to go through this several times, because the risk then is that there's going to be the whole fight is going to happen over again, and it will all have been for naught. So I would say go for whatever they decide to enact this, 1st of February, and then recommend 60-day extensions after that point.
Okay, right now, there's an amendment to the motion on the table. So that amendment is that we extend it to no more than 12 months. So, okay, so do we want to vote on that amendment and then go back to the main motion? Is the commission ready to vote on that?
So do you need a second?
No, there was a second already.
Okay.
You seconded.
All right. Okay.
Could we hear the amendment?
So the amendment was to extend it to no more than 12 months. Any extension would be no more than 12 months. That's my understanding, Roman, of what you said.
The landowners, they wouldn't be able to increase rent at all. And this would be, going on for even 5 months if there's something that happened. To look at both sides, because this is an issue that concerns all of Albany, not just the tenants. So to give some comfort to the homeowners as well, to equal out both sides of the field.
Okay, so is there any further discussion on the amendment?
I'm uncomfortable with it being a year. I mean, I think we need to show good faith here. people are concerned that this is going to turn into something will go on and on and on. A year seems like, something that can become quite habitual. I'd like to see it be a shorter interval than that. And I'd like to see there be a limit on how much renewal is allowed once this thing is passed. I mean, of course, the council has the right to alter this. The council could pass another moratorium if it wanted, but I would not like to give the council the opportunity to continue to extend it. I think that would show bad faith.
And I had the same thoughts, and I almost interrupted the vote on that. But I think in looking at the calendar, like we need to look at the city council's calendar. And what we all know is that because we're coming out of this is August, there's no city council. So sometime before that, I think should be the cutoff time. So to say July 1st, I think would be a good cutoff time to say, we recommend you do not extend it past July 1st or earlier if there's a date you feel more comfortable with.
Can I add one more thought?
Yes, of course.
We've heard some homeowners as well today, mom and pop homeowners who live in Albany that have stated their concerns whether they need to make repairs or improvements to their properties. And if this moratorium were to put them in danger of losing the property, could we include an emergency cost, just so they're not rushing right now?
Okay, we have the one amendment in place. Now you're talking about something else. So let's deal with the time frame first instead of adding on to that, okay? So is there a compromise that we can?
I would suggest that we allow the moratorium to stay in place for no more than 6 months from the date of its passage. I think that ought, it won't pass in September. It's going to probably come back to us for further review. The council will probably not want to make a decision on first blush. So I think 6 months would be enough. And if it turns out to not be enough, the council always has the prerogative of deciding to pass another moratorium.
What I would recommend is that if we put on the 6 months, that we really encourage the council to finish the other work within the 6 months, that every priority be given to this issue to come to some completion within 6 months.
That's my suggestion. That would be a friendly amendment, I guess. Would that be acceptable to you?
How does the rest of the commission feel?
I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with the 6 months because of just, again, looking at the calendar. Looking at the calendar, my feeling is there's a very good chance this isn't going to be resolved. On the other hand, I think, as Margie said and what I said earlier, it's the council's prerogative. So if we recommend 6 months, be no longer than 6 months, I think that does a little bit to make people more comfortable. And I have some suggestions for more amendments later, but after we talk about this one. So
You mentioned that the council may take its own time, so this is from when the council starts it, not when, we recommend.
From when it passes.
That's correct.
So that may be in a few months of its own.
Yeah.
So we want to take that.
Yeah. So 6 months from passage is what I'm suggesting.
Okay, so are we ready to vote? So the amendment is 6 months from passage.
With no extensions?
With no extensions.
I think we should allow at least one extension.
Could we do 9 months and meet in the middle?
Well, again, the council can do whatever they want. This is just a recommendation. So we're just,
Yeah,
this is what
because
we recommend.
6 months is only adding one more month to the process. We originally started with 5 months.
I don't know why it should take more than 6 months. I mean,
Yeah. 90 days with 45.
the issue is the issue, and the research is, can go on, but I don't think it takes 6 months to get to the bottom of this.
I think it could take easily. I've had more than 30 years of experience.
Well, if the moratorium isn't, I mean, if it takes that long for it to pass, I don't know what the use of it will be, really. But
How about 6 months with one extension of 45 days?
That's up to Roman, it's his motion.
That's our commission. I want to.
Yeah, but I mean, you've made the motion, it's an amendment, so if you can accept a friendly amendment
Well,
if you
his
wish.
motion was for 12 months, okay?
Right.
That's what we're talking about. So I just want to be clear, so we keep clear what we're talking about. So we're right, so are we ready to vote on whether we want to do a 12-month moratorium?
No, I'm a little confused.
Can I,
Are we talking about 12 months? If we kill the 12 months, then can we have an amendment for 6 months, or?
Well, I think that would be up to the city council.
No. I'm talking about here, the process here. Are we ready to vote on the, if we kill his amendment, can we then have an amendment to 6 months?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to vote on the 12 months. Okay, those in favor of the 12 months, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay.
No. Okay. Okay, so now we're back to the main motion, which is what Bart put on, that we send this report to the city council.
Well, I'd like to then move that we substitute for the current interval that's specified, that the moratorium could last up to 6 months from the date of its passage.
I second the motion.
Okay, so I think you would consider that a friendly amendment?
No, that's a new motion at this point.
Okay, so a new motion, so that, can you just repeat it again? I'm sorry.
That the moratorium, the rent moratorium could extend for no more than 6 months from the date of its passage.
Okay, so there's a second. Do we want discussion on this?
I think we've already kind of.
Yes, okay, are we ready to vote? Those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, so that passes.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're on to the main motion, which was Bart's motion to send it to the city council.
I have another amendment I want to
Okay.
propose. This may be something we need to work out the technicalities, but I think we've heard from a lot of landlords here that are in the situation, they've just purchased a home in Albany, they had no idea that this was coming. Maybe we need to consider some sort of exemption for people that essentially have just bought the home, they just bought the place, versus someone that has owned it for, say, 10 years. I think, this is, so what do the other commissioners think about this? Is it too complicated, or?
The question is, I guess, how would that work? Who would make that determination? There'd have to be a process internally. I mean, I could see, a decision that basically would say that if this creates an undue hardship in terms of a person being able to earn a fair return on their property, that could be an exception made. I guess it would have to go to planning and zoning, wouldn't it? Jeff?
So it's good practice to always have an exception process in anything like this, just
Yeah.
because there are certain circumstances that are difficult to anticipate here. As to the decision-making body, I'm not sure what commission would have that role. I think that would be part of the what you ought to discuss and what you should be recommending to the city council. There right now isn't really a advisory commission that is clearly solely a housing subject matter commission in the city of Albany.
Okay, so, Brian, so you're suggesting an exemption for, I think new in what time period, I think then we get into what's the time frame we're talking about, and although the state law says that the landlord's entitled to a fair rate of return on their, investment. So maybe that needs to, I don't know. Who judges the fair rate of return? That's the question.
Yeah, I think maybe this is just something for the council to consider.
Okay. So are you withdrawing that amendment?
I think, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Can I suggest one last amendment?
Okay.
An emergency for all the landowners out there. If you're in risk of losing a property in some sort of danger where you might financially lose it, this is just an example, not the direct reason. But can there be, a small amount to raise the rents in order for the property?
Well, there is an amount, it's 3% right now.
But if it had to go over, if they were in risk of losing the property or something along those lines. Just, so we can include it as well in our recommendation.
Well, that's why I think Jeff is suggesting, and I think it makes sense to have an exception clause that basically says if this creates an undue hardship on a given landlord, that, that exception may be made.
Yeah, the way I think this would work is that we would have not try to predict exactly what the scenario is tonight, but to have an application process, and if they have some documentation that shows why they need it, whether it's a financial one or condition of the property or something like that, that they ought to be able to have a process where they can seek relief. And that would be an open and transparent process so that everybody knows what's going on.
Okay.
And tenants would be able to be informed of that process as well.
So then I guess my motion would be that we would add to this an exemption clause where this restriction would create an undue hardship on a given landlord, and a process would be developed for applying for an exemption.
Okay, is there a second to that amendment?
I second.
Okay. Is there discussion? Okay, we're ready to vote on that amendment? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes. Now we have the main motion as amended, which is to refer it to the city council. Is there any discussion on that? Okay, we're ready to vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? It passes.
So was there a motion on that last one? Motion to say?
Yes.
To refer it to, okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, Bart made the motion.
That's where
and
we started.
Yes,
Second.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the analysis of a feasibility of a rent review board. So I wanted to, just a second, sorry. I wanted to start out by saying a couple things, that there are cities in the state of California that have enacted rent control ordinances, and I want to talk about what the difference between a rent control ordinance and a rent review. The major feature of a rent control is that the amount of rent increase a landlord may impose each year is regulated. So, for example, the city of San Francisco and has rent control, and the city of Berkeley has rent control, and it's regulated. And for the city of San Francisco, it's regulated. What's the allowable rent increase is 60% of the consumer price index for all urban consumers in the Bay Area. That's allowed to be the rent increase. So I want to talk about what is the CPI, explain that, explain the consumer price index, because in some of our issues for the rent review, we're referring to the consumer price index. The consumer price index is calculated annually by the United States Department of Labor, and it's based upon prices such as food, clothing, shelter, fuel, transportation fares, charges for doctors and dentist services, drugs, and other goods and services that people buy for daily living. So it's something that the United States government does every year. There is a special consumer price index for urban consumers because the government recognizes that it's more expensive to live in an urban area than not in an urban area. So we are not we are not saying that we should enact a rent control where we would say, okay, this is the only amount of rent that you are allowed to charge, as they are doing in cities that have rent control. There is a chart that, the chart was in the back of the room, correct? Okay.
There's a slide, isn't it?
Yes, there's a lot of copies. There are a lot of copies in the back.
So the chart looks like this. And what we've done is given option 1 and option 2. And what we've meant it to be is a kind of thing where you can take, we've looked at the critical elements of any rent review program. For example, who administers it? Is it binding or non-binding? We've given 2 options for each of those, and we don't see that option 1 has to be option 1 all the way down. We want the city council to look at it and say, okay, I like option 1 under administrative body, but under decision criteria, we prefer option 2. So we wanted to, like I said, give options for what would be on the table for this. So I want to go through the chart a little bit. So administrative body, there are some cities that use an administrative body such as ECHO, which is the Eden Council for Hope and Opportunity. ECHO now works with the city of Albany and helps tenants, explains to them what the law is. They're not able to help the tenant who's gotten an unreasonable rent increase or anything like that, but they can tell them what the law is. So ECHO currently works with the city. There is another nonprofit housing agency, Project Sentinel, which works with a couple of different cities, Fremont and Los Gatos, and they got really high marks for the work they did. So one option would be to have a nonprofit housing agency run a rent review program. Option 2 would be administered through an advisory board, the rent review board appointed by the city council. So, for example, the city of San Leandro has a rent review board. It has 5 members, 2 landlords, 2 tenants, and 1 citizen who's just a homeowner, neither a landlord or a tenant. And it's also Project ECHO runs that program for the city. So in looking at this, Kathy Deal and I were on this subcommittee. We felt that option 2 would provide a greater oversight for the process because the city would have more direct input in the membership of the board. The board would be citizens of the city of Albany, and we would have more control over what was done. The next area is what triggers the use of a rent review process. So this is where the difference between rent control and rent review. In rent control, it's just put out there, this is how much rent you can charge, you can't charge any more than that. So option 1 was $75 or 5%, and we meant to say whichever is less. And option 2 was any increase above 70% of the increase in the consumer price index for all urban consumers. So what we looked at was, according to the Alameda County Board of Supervisors Community Development Agency, so this is where that number came from, they state that the median rent for Albany was $3,100 a month. So if a tenant who is paying $3,100 a month gets a 5% increase, would you please, please listen respectfully. We listen to you. I'd ask you to listen to us. That means $150 a month rent increase. And if it happened every year over 5 years, the rent increase would, over 5 years, go to $3,700 a month. And we think that that would cause a financial hardship on the tenant. We also looked at how much money the person would have to be making, and it would be above what the average income for the city of Albany is. Under binding versus non-binding, One option is non-binding for those units excluded by Costa-Hawkins. So that means they would be able to go through the process, but there would be no binding decision. For those that were covered under Costa-Hawkins, so binding only, option 2 is binding only for those units not covered under Costa-Hawkins.
And can I
Yes,
make
please.
a comment? For the non-binding, that means that it would cover single-family homes and condominiums and possibly property that was built at the 1995 cutoff date for Costa-Hawkins. But again, like Margie is saying, it would be a non-binding decision. It'd just be an opportunity for the landlord and the tenant to go through some type of mediation process.
So we looked at the non-binding versus the binding, different options that are going on in areas around the Bay Area and in California, and listened to some tenants. A lot of tenants felt there was no point in going through it unless it was binding. Although, based on the research of the committee, I do want to point out that in some cases, the effectiveness of non-binding was what we were told by the people that run those programs. It was related to the landlord's concern that a rent control program would replace rent review. So although it was non-binding, the landlord did have some incentive to come to some decision with the tenant, trying to put off having a rent control program. So limit on rent increases over what time period? Not more than once every 12-month period unless there's a written agreement. Some people move in. I haven't heard of this happening in Albany, but for the first 3 months they have a lower rent, and then the rent gets raised, and that's an agreement before they've moved in. So unless there were an agreement, the rent could not be increased more than once every 12 months. Exemptions for binding review under state law. So these...
Just, Margie,
yes,
we
please.
want to also point out that this is consistent with Albany's housing element.
Right, that's written was in the housing element. So exemptions, so, okay. The decision criteria. One of the things that we looked at the city of Los Gatos, and their decision criteria was they have formulas that, this is option 2 I'm talking about now, and I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but there were 2 reasons the landlord could raise the rent: if they were doing improvements or if their debt increased, if they refinanced and their debt increased. So there were formulas that would be looked at to say, okay, this is an exception to raise the rent by a certain amount, and there's a formula, and you go by that formula, and it allows the tenant, the landlord, to increase the rent based on if they're doing improvements to the property, needed improvements, or that type of thing.
But the formulas would need to be revised so that we could address financial hardships to the tenant as well as the frequency and amount of rent increases.
So just cause for evictions. They're the same in both, and what we really felt was that without just cause, the landlord can evict the tenant at any time for no reason. So to have rent review in place without just cause means the landlord can evict the tenant just so they can raise the rent to whatever amount they desire. So most local measures that had a rent review also contained a just cause provision. So we would recommend that there be a just cause provision for eviction. A retaliation. These were pretty standard in rent review cases, in rent review situations, and rent control, that if the tenant decides to take advantage of a rent review, that there would be no retaliation against the tenant for that. There's also state law that forbids retaliation under certain measures. Required notification of the rent review. We would encourage the landlords to give a 90-day notice of any rent increase. By state law, it's just 30 days if it is less than 10% and 60 days if it's more than 10%. So the 90 days would be, we would not make it part of the the program, but we would encourage the tenant to encourage the landlord to give the tenant 90 days. Also, landlord must notice the tenant of rent review program at the time of the rent increase and at the beginning of the tenancy. And we felt that this was a way to make it clear to both the landlord and the tenant that the program's in place and what the provisions of it are. We looked at the cost to the city. So the city of Los Gatos, with a population of 30,000, so it's about 10,000 more than we have, pays $32,000 a year to Project Sentinel to run their rent review program. So that's one cost there. San Leandro, which the population is much larger than ours, has one full-time employee who spends 30% or less of his time on rent review. They also pay Project Echo to run the rent review process with the board, and they pay Project Echo $25,000 for that. $15,000 of it is administering the review board, working with the board and helping them through their process.
And we recommended option 2, although both options seem reasonable when it comes to cost. But option 2 is more consistent with our recommendation to create a review committee or board.
And I know one of the landlords we heard from wanted a sunset clause, but we've put in there, we do think we need something that would assess the program, that it would be evaluated every 12 months, and recommended revisions based on the evaluation. So this is what our suggestion is. I wanted to address a couple other comments that were made and some correspondence that we as a commission received. And many of the landlords that wrote to us stated that the real problem was an inadequate supply of housing, and the only real solution was to provide more housing. And I agree with you. And also I see you're still here, the woman that was first asking, what are we doing about affordable housing? I really recommend that you look at this. It's the housing element for the city of Albany. In this housing element, it talks about affordable housing, but it also talks about providing more housing. There's 3 basically different chapters. 1 is an assessment of housing needs. 2 is a site inventory analysis, and 3 was an analysis of constraints to housing production. So I have studied this a lot. You can tell, I've gone over this a lot. And I think in our city, we have just so few, we have few options to create more housing. So although that's an answer, I think it's going to be a hard answer for the city of Albany. I also think that we have very, very few tools to keep housing affordable in the city of Albany. I've studied the housing element for that too, and I think that looking at some type of rent review, and we've tried to give various aspects of it, look at different criteria and say, okay, if you don't like this, you can do that, change it up a little bit, do this. So that would be a tool toward to help affordable housing in the city that we live in. So do you want to add anything, Kathy, to?
Well, I was just thinking about the affordable housing issue, and there's this tendency to believe that because we have this supply and demand issue, and we have increasing income, particularly in Silicon Valley, that there's only one choice, and that's to increase the rent because there's this opportunity to do that. But in reality, are more choices in addition to increasing rent.
I'm sorry, you finished? No, okay, I would just like to add one more item that I'd like the landlords to consider. There are a group of citizens who are motivated to put rent control on the ballot. So I would hope that as a city, we could act with our commission and with our council to do something instead of having it go to the ballot, that we could do something, and it would happen sooner than if it went to the ballot. But I think, that the notion is out there. I just want to put that out on the table. Okay, other commissioners?
So, first of all, I want to talk about scope, because this is a very important thing with this commission. We have a very broad possible scope of anything that has to do with social or economic issues. And it's very important to stay focused on what our assignment from the City Council was. So that said, I mean, just to say a little bit about the affordable housing, that Albany is the 35th most dense city in the United States. We're 1 square mile with 20,000 people. So we're not going to be building some huge amount of new housing that's going to allow more people to come in. I think more housing is not necessarily the answer here. So in terms of what we're overall trying to accomplish, I think it's trying to stabilize the environment for people that are living here. So that said, I think you've done a very good job of laying out options and so forth. What I'm concerned about is if we look at our agenda here, the agenda is labeled analysis of feasibility of rent review board. So when we've gotten a little bit into all the details of what we can do and what we should do, and I think the feasibility is in there. I think you've laid out a lot of options, but when we go to present this to the City Council, that needs to be like the primo focus. Is this, can we do it, before we get into so much whether or not we should do it.
Can I add
go ahead.
one thing? Thank you. One of the staff recommendations, number one, is to adopt the motion requesting that the City Council give direction to the Commission to continue public outreach. And if you can do, it says, prepare for Council review a recommendation on key elements of a rent review program. So it's also the program, not just the feasibility.
Right,
more into
and
it.
what I'm saying, Roman, is that if you look at our agenda, though, it says feasibility. And I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing the other work, I'm saying, but the focus should be feasibility.
Well,
it should be really clear that that you're really presenting, because that is where this is going to go down in the City Council. If someone comes out and says, well, you know, I don't think we can afford this. So that's got to be the focus. Go ahead respond.
I think that what happened was that we just continued to carry over that description of the agenda item. But we have been asked by the City Council to provide options and pros and cons to those options, and as Roman pointed out, recommendations. So I think we are well within the purvey of what the City Council is asking us.
Okay.
And we have also addressed the cost issue.
Okay, that's good. So then I'll accept that. And I just wanted to add a little bit more about some of the commentary we've gotten, particularly from the landlords. And a lot of it is centered around rent control, which of course we're not even talking about rent control. I've seen, there was one that it just went on. Rent control is bad because of this, rent control is bad because of that. Now, on the other hand, when we start getting into the word mandatory, it's drifting into rent control. So this is where I think we have to be careful when it comes down to the discussion, is this going to be binding or not, that we have to think very carefully. And as I said, I think a few meetings back, you know, I advocate being as aggressive as, coming up with as aggressive as a proposal as we can that will pass. And so this is one item for you to consider, that if it's binding, I mean, I understand that's what really makes it worthwhile, but it also makes it harder for some of the council members to agree with. So I think there was even some laughing in the audience about the data that we're using. This data is coming from our county government. That's what we're given to work with. And I'm actually a landlord myself, not in Albany, but one of the things I've learned, never rely on Craigslist. Craigslist will tell you what rentals are on the market available. It doesn't tell you what people are actually paying. a lot of the times they'll ask one amount, get a different one. So the data, this is the data we have to work with. And if we need more data, then I think there's room for maybe a survey or something deeper. But I mean, that's what we have to work with, and we have to make our decisions based on that fact. So other than that, I think, I mean, if you're feeling comfortable about the fact that, or is the city council already comfortable that this is feasible, and that's just a carryover on the agenda, I think this is good work that we can send on.
Yeah, Bart.
It doesn't really, at this point, it's a question of what's feasible. And I think what we're doing is giving the council options. I think that the first time this comes to council, it's really going to be more of an educational session than a decision-making session. A lot of these ideas, a lot of these models that exist, the council's probably not familiar with. So I think what we'll be doing is presenting the council with what are the existing possibilities. It'll be up to council to decide what model they would like us to pursue in terms of a recommendation.
I mean, I think that's why we broke it down into elements to say, okay, it's not just going to be one solution. There's a lot of solutions to these issues. So, Roman, did you want to add something?
We're still going to hear public comment after
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I want to make sure that's not going to get off.
No, don't worry. Don't worry, public.
My biggest concern, which may not actually happen, is that all these talks of the rent review and binding agreements, that some of the landlords would raise the price now while they can, and what effect would we have if we did it after the fact? So I just want us all to listen to both sides, and I also encourage the audience not to laugh or make fun, because we're really trying to find an agreement between both sides that will work. Having one side attack the other and going back and forth, I mean, if we're all angry, it's not going to work, and we need to find a peaceful solution. Yeah.
Okay, are there other commission members? So we can open it up to the public now. So Isabel's going to read the names.
Clifford Fry, Lois Brown, Ed Crowley.
Good evening. Clifford Freed. Unlike the whole prospect of a moratorium, which is rent control, anything that regulates rents and says how much a landlord can charge and for what period it's regulated, that is rent control. So I really don't understand some of the comments I've been hearing from the commission in that regard. On the other hand, a rent review board, it's not necessarily evil. It's worked in other places in the Bay Area. So long as it's voluntary and it leads to some mediation between landlords and tenants, because a tenant feels that there was an unreasonable rent increase, and a landlord has an opportunity to explain the rent increase, why the rent increase goes into effect, that's a good thing. I don't see anything inherently evil with that. There's been some talk this evening about corporations in Albany imposing rent increases, and I don't know of any large corporations that have moved into Albany and are taking over a lot of properties. The large properties that I looked at are owned by individuals who have been in Albany for quite some period of time. And from what I can tell, that they haven't imposed large rent increases. The answer is, and it's been discussed, is just create more housing. The focus, maybe your comment back to the city council, is rather than asking us to investigate rent controls and rent review boards, is ask us to investigate how we can create more affordable housing in Albany. There are a lot of urban areas that are being creative and increasing their housing supply. That can be done. There was also a comment about diversity. Take a look at how diversity decreased in Berkeley over the years with their rent control scheme. Rent control doesn't improve diversity, it actually kills diversity. So whatever diversity exists in Albany, kiss it goodbye with any form of rent control. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lois Brown, and I spoke earlier at an earlier meeting. I'm once again a mom and pop landlord. And what got me when I sat down here was that all the statistics were about tenants and nothing about the kind of landlord that exists in Albany. And I mean, it seems to me that there are a lot of people like myself who you know, are barely making it with our properties, but we're trying to be as decent as we can with our tenants. My rents are all below $2,500 a month. And we haven't really gotten much attention until tonight. And so I was just wondering if there's some way to study who are the landlords in Albany? I mean, who are we talking about, really? I'd like to know, because I think more of them are like me, who I'm a retiree living off of my rents. I'm trying to do the best I can for my tenants, and I kind of feel like we're being overlooked. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
In your review committee or your commission, 2, 2, and 1, the homeowner will decide everything. $3,100 a month is nuts. Your figures don't make any sense for the population of units that are going to be covered by this. Craigslist is accurate and it's high because it's newly available apartments, not the spectrum of all of them that are rented. We have 7 units. Ours are 1 bedrooms are going for $1,200 in the neighborhood of $1,200. Our 2 bedrooms are going in the neighborhood of $1,500 a month. We're way below. We're more than $500 per unit below market. And for you to fix us into a 1% per year increase means we're going to have to sell. Means basically we're going to have to sell to a San Giacomo who can hire lawyers and get the rent increases. Really, you're using a Nolo Press book for your legal opinions? Come on, seriously. And it's a renter's advocate book too. Come on. Decision criteria, you never figure debt service in a financing, in an analysis. Debt service is strictly a financing option. Nobody should be rewarded for taking on more debt. What about landlords who keep rents down like us? Like I just said, no good deed goes unpunished. It's pretty clear you guys are not interested in other opinions. You're limiting me to 2 minutes. I really can't, how much can I get in 2 minutes? Your subcommittee could not be more biased. Let's talk about supply. Right now in Albany, there's a developer behind the old Sizzler who wants to build 7 condos. Planning Commission, their only input was, well, we want you to build 8 condos, 8 luxury condos. Why not 15 or 20 low-income apartments there? That's what Albany really ought to be doing. It's not, Albany has a lot of this at its disposal. It doesn't do it.
Thank you.
Penn Cow, Wayne Shipman, and Dean Epinitz.
Dear Commission members, I think I just mentioned that I own 2 apartment buildings in Albany. And first I want to address the complaint from one lady about recently raising rent. I think she did not mention 2 things. One is her rent was artificially low and was not raised by the previous owner for the last 10 to 15 years. And even after the rent increase, the rent is still 20% below the market rent in that neighborhood. The second thing is that after I own that building, my cost is multiple times of what the previous owner was experiencing because of the property tax more than tripled on this building, and the debt service, the mortgage cost probably quadrupled or even higher than that. So operating costs also increased. Also, the property needs a lot of renovation to make it more habitable. So I'm spending $40,000-$50,000 just to improve on the building. So I'm very open to a rent review process, but I think that trigger percentage should be higher, not 3%, more like 10% or something. Then I think as owner, I can show the tenant the cost increase on this building, and I'm very open to understand tenants' concern about any rent increase I incur on the building. The second point I want to make is that this fixed percentage rent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't believe you understand our business. The small property owner who rents single-family houses and condos and halves of duplexes in Albany are in the business of creating the property, advertising it, attracting people to it, placing people in it under a legal contract, preserving them, and delighting them so that they want to stay. Nothing that you have done, nothing that you have proposed here adds to that at all. And I take a couple of things that you have suggested here as direct threats. You have said you propose this rent review as an alternative to rent control. That is a threat. You have said that you propose some sort of rent mediation and rent advisory group as an alternative to a vote in the city. I take that as a threat. You do not belong in this. We will be fine without you. The market will determine who would like to live in Albany. Those folks who come here because of the schools and the city and the police department and the fire department and the small town community that we have are here because they choose to be here. We have attracted them here with our work. We have improved the property values on our streets. If you want to be the people that say, I can't pass along the cost of improving the windows and the heating and the fire protection and the safety and the building envelope of the buildings that my tenants live in, I will make it your problem to explain it to them, while I will not do that.
Thank you.
My first objection to all this is that this is the first notice I received by that blue card for this particular meeting. I had no notice of these other two meetings at all, and I'm not the only landlord in that position. First thing is, any decision on rent control should be made by a popular vote, in my opinion, not by a committee or a council. The ability to charge market rates enables landlords to pay all the constant tax increases for the school and city, as we all know, that keep coming up. Rent control does result in declining property values for all forms of property in Albany. And rent control generally affects mom and pop landlords the most. These people endured the recession of 2007, when vacancies were way up, the ability to maintain property, to maintain the repairs were difficult. Now that there's a swing the other way, complaints are not taking this into account. Along this line of thinking, there should be minimum rent levels set also. Rent control restricts landlords' ability to keep up with the maintenance. I think that's pretty obvious. Rents have reached a plateau now already. The market dictates these kinds of supply and demand. This is a cornerstone of our society. This has resulted in a high quality of life that we now have in Albany, which will change under rent control. Investors will no longer be eager to begin new housing projects because of the return on their money spent. The supply of rental units and construction will stagnate. As an example, rent control in Berkeley has been a total failure, resulting in a rent board with no oversight, bloated fees, and constant lawsuits with no fairness to the landlords. In the long run, rent control will push rents higher. When vacancies do occur, landlords will be forced to list their properties at a higher level for fear of the rent figure being locked in for no reasonable allotment for the cost of living, inflation, maintenance, capital improvements. The cost of doing business in Albany has gone way up over the years. Property taxes, schools, etc. Are you going to restrict the prices of homes for sale also? That seems to be the same line of thinking to me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Liam Curry, Francesco Papalia, Julie Wakili Lynch.
Hey, good evening. My rent went up 30% this year. I'm going to be leaving our city. I'm not staying here. My neighbor's rent is going up $1,000 a month. He's moving also. I'll find another place to live. He's got kids. It's going to be harder for him. So good luck with this problem. I'll be reading about it in the news, but you know, I can't raise my income 30% a year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francesco Papalia. I am disheartened that Commissioner Deal says that supply and demand is not how the world works, that there's another way. And you're correct in the sense that the other way is price controls. And price controls are rent control. So that's your other way. Otherwise, I'm not sure how else you set prices except by price controls. And Commissioner Beal said that the answer isn't a lack of supply, that isn't the problem. I don't know what to tell you. There's a 300,000 unit shortage in the Bay Area. It is a shortage of supply here. You've met a lot of wonderful, it appears to me, great property owners. You are punishing the many for the sins of the few. You seem to be completely comfortable with creating all of these controls, and they're price controls, on all the good people because you've received testimony that there are some people who've been bad. And I agree, there probably are. But you shouldn't be punishing the good people because of the actions of a few. What do we usually call that in our society? Discrimination? Also, when you come up with this information about who is getting gouged in your terms, please, the gentleman who just came up here, I'd like to know, are you in a single-family home or a condominium? If that's the case, then this won't help him. So the people that you've brought up as testimonies for why we need something, I think many of them will not be affected by this because they're exempt from price controls.
Julie Wakely Lynch from St. Albans Church. I was sitting out in the overflow with a woman who is an Albany resident and owns rental properties, and from what she told me, she's a really good landlord. Her rents are below market, and she's counting on the income from those properties for her retirement, and she works 3 jobs right now. And as our conversation went on, she said, "I'm sorry, we're on opposite sides." And I said, "I don't think that we need to be on opposite sides. A rent review board is not rent control. It's a mediated space for conversation aimed at fairness for both parties." And again, I would just posit, Albany is a small city. We can use the size of our city to our advantage. We can be nimble and creative. We do not need to be antagonistic with each other. There are people in this room of very different perspectives who have worked together on the Diverse Housing Working Group, and we have educated ourselves about housing policy in California. we have found ways to have very delicate conversations while still being respectful to one another and not needing to dismiss one another because we have differences of opinion. So I just offer to you that any community also that doesn't keep an eye out for those on the margins, that just says, well, those people can go live somewhere else, is really shirking its responsibility to carry its fair share within the region. There's not an unlimited amount of places that people can just go to. So I just encourage both the commission and everyone who's here this evening to be willing to open up to actually listen to other people and to use the incredible combined brain power that we have to see what can we come up with that actually works for Albany. Thank you.
Thank you.
R. Marin, Catherine Sutton, and Michelle Lifshitz.
Well, first off, this started out with such false narratives, which I believe are just meant to skewer the public opinion. The statistics that you're using, the median income on a national average. Listen, California, we all know this. We have the highest property taxes. We have the highest property values. We have the highest gasoline prices. And guess what? We have the highest income. So I don't know where that number came from. That $3,100 is probably a collection of houses in the upper neighborhoods of Albany that they're getting $4,000 or $5,000 a month for, and take an average. I would almost guarantee, I'd bet $10 to 1 that there's not a landlord in here that's getting $3,100 a month for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment in Albany. Anybody here getting that?
No, you're right. Sir, please, you're out of order. Please address the commission.
Okay, I'm out of order.
Thank
All right.
you.
False narrative on CPI, right? Okay, yeah, cost of living. For individuals, does that take in consideration the cost of operating a building? No. False narrative again. Let's talk about affordable housing. You mentioned the density of this city. Where are you going to find that property? And Economics 101 tells you capital expenditure finds the highest rate of return. Who is going to invest in this city if there's rent review or rent control to create affordable housing unless the government comes in and does it? In which we're all going to pay for that. Okay, a couple of things. This whole thing is a result of rent control by our neighbors across the bay. I want to read you something. Of existing rent-controlled apartments has been reduced by demolition or conversion to sale or private homes like condominiums. There's a serious and steady depletion of housing and rental stock, perhaps 1,000 or more units annually.
Okay,
you know who wrote that?
Thank you, sir.
Ted Gullickson, Executive Director of the San Francisco Tenants
Okay,
Union.
thank you. I'm
Okay.
sorry, your time's up.
All right.
Catherine Sutton, Albany resident. I hear a lot of people that are scared that their livelihood is threatened. And it seems to me that this rent review suggestion is not punishing everybody. It's simply giving recourse when there is a landlord who asks for a certain amount more than whatever you guys decide is reasonable as a rent increase. And I don't know whether that $75 really means anything, since you say 5%, whichever is less, because the 5% is probably going to be more than $75, but you might need to put a different figure in there. I'm confused about the binding part. Most of this, I think, is great. I would support it. And it seems that the cost of doing it by volunteers is going to be minimal, as you suggest. I would just like to say that no rent increase more than once every 12-month period, unless written into the original agreement. This is not happening here, as far as I know, in many cases. I've heard of many people who have had multiple rent increases over the year. So I don't know how that would definitely trigger a rent review process, presumably. So this binding part, how can it be a rent review board and be binding without being rent control? That's what I'm not clear about. and I'd like to hear more about that. I think the idea of the Rent Review Board is great, because I think we need to give people the access to talk with each other. There was a person here who was directly answering something somebody else had said about their landlord's practices, their landlording practices. That would be the sort of thing that would come to the Rent Review Board, and they would be able to talk like people, like Reverend Judy was suggesting, just talking like individuals and working something out. And the fact is that the people who live in Albany tend not to be our great teachers, our wonderful firemen or policemen. They tend not to live in Albany because they can't afford it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle Lipschitz. I live and work in Albany. I wanted to, there was a lot that I wanted to say, but I'll try to pick. I've noticed, I came here straight from work and missed a large part of the meeting, and I noticed that there are it's a large population of landlords here, from what I've heard, many of whom don't live in Albany. And there was a rumor, I've heard from other tenants of Albany that this meeting was there were a lot of notices being given outside of Albany to property owners. So I'm glad that that you showed up. But the suggestion that tenants here are being staged by the commission is outrageous. That is not, this has been in my calendar as long as I've known about it. Nobody's pressured me to come here. In fact, the other tenants I spoke with haven't, not, anyway. The language of rent review versus rent control is obviously very confusing. My experience with rent control, I think in Berkeley it's something like rent can't be raised by more than 1.3% annually. That's not anything anyone is suggesting here. I have a good relationship with my landlord. This isn't about having a battle between them. It's about treating people with respect. If my rent went up 20%, 30%, my income would not go up that same proportion, and I would have to leave. I would lose my work. I would lose my home. I think the binding, it needs to be, that language could be made more clear. I see moving vans every day in my neighborhood, people having to leave. So, and I know that I've spoken to other tenants who are not here today, who are having the same experience. I guess I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kevin Tannehill, Elaine Stelton, Brian Eddy.
Hello, I'm Kevin Tannehill again. I just wanted to say, after just kind of listening here, I do own property in Albany. We have been very good landlords, especially. Most of our stuff is definitely way under market right now. But I would say that the reason there's some smiling, some cheers, and some contentiousness here is because of the statistics that are being thrown at us. I think, for realistic purposes, if you were to take all the stuff that Costa Hawkins eliminates, and then you were to go up and down and take the buildings that were left, you take out the village, and you take the buildings that were left, which is essentially what we're talking about affecting, and you figure out who the owners are there, and you talk to them about what their rents are and come up with figures and actually put some effort into it, then you might get a more realistic view. To rely on other publications and county stuff because that's all we have, that's just a lazy cop-out. And we're talking about policies that affect lives. You owe everybody more than that. You owe everybody more than that. Okay, and when you pull those properties out, I think you're going to find that there's not a whole lot of owners. The owner pool is smaller than you would imagine. To get that information is not that difficult. It really isn't. And then you would get some actual accurate information, because you're talking about putting something in policy that's going to cause a lot of time, a lot of money, and everything else, and you need to understand actually what you're affecting and who you're affecting. And there is just no information as to that right now. is a lazy way to do it. Okay?
Thank you.
Hi, I inherited the building that I own from my mother and father, who worked very hard on it for years. A couple years ago, my mother passed away, and I moved back into the area from Florida, and I noticed that Lower Solano was not dumpy anymore. It was actually becoming kind of chic. So I invested my entire inheritance, and let me remind you, this is called investment property, and it's called investment property for a reason. We are not in the business of subsidizing poor people in Albany. This may not be politically correct, but this is the reality. That is the job of city, state, and local governments. That is not on the backs of these people who have worked so hard their whole lives. You've got to find another way. You've got to find another way. This is wrong. This is not the People's Republic of Berkeley. Also, I wanted to mention that by locking up scarce housing units instead of creating diversity, you're actually creating less potential for diversity because less people have the option to move in, because people who are in rent-controlled apartments don't want to leave. So if they don't leave those apartments, there's no opportunity for anybody else to move in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I just want to say I'm in favor of your rent review proposal. Just again, we are here because of some of the egregious rent increases that have become a trend in Albany, not because of the landlords who have kept things reasonable or for asked for a reasonable increase to cover their costs or to make a little more money. I have no problem with that. The reason I like the rent review board is because it gives some kind of way to mediate somewhere between the 30% and the, whatever it is, 10%. The minimum is that is required for notification. Mr. Bond, at the last meeting, you mentioned something about the number of landlords who actually have a business license in Albany as being very tiny.
That is so not true. We all have business licenses.
Of course you're required. Please, you're out of order, please.
I'll defer to the chair. I can respond at the end of the public comments.
Yes.
The normal protocol for.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, cool. And I just would like to I also have an investment here. I've invested $250,000 in here over the last few years in rent. My kids are in schools here. My investment was so that they could continue through here. And, I realize that at some point I may have to leave, but I'd like my kids to be able to stay here. And so I would like there to be some mechanism for which I can have a reasonable security to live here. I have a good job, but it's not enough for this place.
Thank you.
Jim Yan and John Steed.
So I'm a small landlord. I own both properties in Albany and also Oakland. So Oakland, as everybody knows, is a pretty strict rent control area. So I think I could probably give some pretty good perspective. My own experience is that rent control has a lot of, is doing a lot of harms. Most tenants would assume that rent control would benefit them. That can be further away from the truth. If you look at the cities in the Bay Area which has the strongest rent control, the market rent is actually not coming down. It's actually skyrocketing. If you look at San Francisco and Oakland, the reason is that the rent control, the longer history the rent control is, in the city, and the stricter the rent control is, some long-time tenants will stay there forever and then paying maybe like half below market. And then that basically depletes the market of any new housing supply. So basically, but for some tenants are paying way less than market rent, that means, you know, there are fewer available vacant units. And then the newcomers, they have to pay a lot higher than, you know, what they used to pay. So that's the reason, that's basically the new tenants are, the recent tenants are subsidizing for the long-term tenants. So if you think about it this way, you know, this is actually not benefiting all the tenants. So the second thing is that having very strict rent control laws is just, you know, make the property management a lot harder. So it becomes very difficult to evict a bad tenant. So you know, the tenant protection is actually doing harm to, you know, the good tenants. You know, they just want to live there, but then having somebody who's a drug dealer living next door, and then.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Okay.
You've heard from a lot of landlords who are kind of agitated and very intense, and there's a reason for that, because many of us are small mom and pop type people. I'd say the majority in Albany are people who live here or in the area, and they've spent their whole lives, like me, 30 years, thousands of dollars of toil and work and sweat to make their properties what they are. And then you're going to come in and control that so that they can't raise the rents. Many of them are for retirement reasons. This is for a retirement reason for me. If I can't raise my rents gradually, I can't retire. Okay, now people have talked about, like this lady, well, we may have to move. I had to move. I couldn't afford where I was living. I had to move to a new place. The problem with putting restrictions on the property is I can't move my property. It's there. I can't pick it up and take it. I now am in a situation I can't control, and I can't do anything about it. I just have to keep working and struggling and slaving so that somebody can get a break on their rent. And I have to still live in my basement, or I have to continue to try and make these things work because, well, I'm not going to just walk away, or maybe I could have it demolished, or maybe I could try and sell it, but I won't get anything back what I paid for it. So you're putting landlords in a bind, and many of us are really concerned about that. So you can see that there's a lot of frustration, and a lot of, our whole lives are involved in it. My life especially, I'm 67 years old. What am I going to do? Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexa Hauser.
Good evening, Commissioners. Again, I don't think that a rent review board is the solution to the housing crisis in Albany, but I think it can be part of a solution. And so I support it. I would like to see data that matches the population, the housing that we're talking about being affected by rent review. I also have a question about the binding aspect and how there can be something binding if it's merely rent review. I am also concerned about I like the idea of having formulas that are clear, but the debt service concerns me because I think there are people who get into too much debt, and we're sort of supporting them by saying that that's something that would be a way that could be an excuse not to be part of what is figured out as their rent. I would never say that you've taken a lazy approach. I'm sorry that someone said that to you. I think there's more to be done, and I would hope you do it, but I don't think you've approached this in a lazy manner. And I appreciate the work, the time that you've taken, the fact that you've listened to people for 3 meetings, and I have a sense we're going to be listening for more meetings, and we need to, because we need to figure this out well for our town. But I'd like to thank you for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you.
That was the last speaker card.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this subject? Okay, we'll put it back to the commission. Brian?
Before if I may, excuse me.
Oh, yes, yes,
if
okay.
The commission may want to discuss it's a little bit after 10, normally at this time in a commission meeting, there's a check-in to see how much longer you want to go and whether you want to continue it. If I may make an observation, I think that there is probably, from a staff recommendation, is that it might benefit the ultimate success of where the commission wants to take this by continuing your discussion beyond this evening, to see if there's a middle ground someplace. That when you go to council, you have both perspectives, plus maybe if there is something in the middle that works, you've taken a shot at trying to find that.
Can you just clarify what you said? I didn't quite.
What's on the agenda tonight and the recommendation is to prepare for a presentation to the city council. Based on the input that the commission has received tonight, I think there might be some value in continuing the commission discussion and to evaluate whether there might be a middle ground, have the commission try to see if there's a middle ground someplace. And perhaps that will come out of your discussions here shortly, but if not, I think the council, I think, would appreciate the effort to fully vet both sides of the issue.
Okay, so let me go back to, let's have a discussion amongst ourselves.
And I just want to comment on what Jeff said. I mean, I think that may turn out to be good, but we shouldn't just walk out of this room. I do have a comment. Is there a reason why you're photographing us? We're being videotaped here, and I don't like having a light in my eye. So can I ask you to please put that down? Okay, I asked. I asked. I just don't know why you're doing it. We're on live TV. So there's nothing you're recording that's not. Okay, it's just really an irritation. So I'll come back to what I was going to say.
Okay.
We shouldn't leave.
You did ask me a question, so.
Go ahead.
I want to be able to have be able to use it as I would like it to be used in the context that I want it.
Okay, well.
And I'm not doing anything wrong, and I've also asked questions of you guys.
Okay, so let's move on.
I want to ask this question. Is this allowed in city meetings? It is, okay.
Sir, may we ask if you turn off the flash? It is very bright.
Yeah, I have no objection to you recording. It's the flash. You're shining a bright light in my eye.
Okay, let's. This is really out of order. Let's continue our.
Yes.
Okay.
If we go back to topic, I would be open to discussing this later. If we can set up a meeting within the next week or two, I wouldn't want to wait another month for this. It's a very.
I think what I was going to say is, while it's top of mind, we want to respond to what the people have said, and then, so maybe what we need here is a motion to extend the meeting to 10:30.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Just a second. So we're saying we can only go to 10:30?
No, for now
we
to
can go further if we want after that.
Sure.
Okay.
Can I speak?
Okay, so wait, about extending the motion?
No,
Extending
we
the
just
meeting?
voted on that.
Okay, well, I just want, wait, okay, so we're extending the meeting till 10:30.
Right.
All right, let's go.
Okay, great. I feel better, and thank you for turning the flash off. I'm sorry to get upset with you, but yeah. So I think what I want to do here is kind of step out and look at this from like a 30,000-foot view, because we've had a very polarized discussion. I think the tenants feel very strongly about their situation. The landlords feel very strongly about their situation. And I think what I really want to come back to is there was a gentleman that talked about how he's just bought this house, or he's bought an apartment building, and the rents were artificially below market value. He came in, he's got a higher cost factor, he needs to raise the rent, but then that has a pretty sudden, dramatic effect on the tenants. So I think what we're seeing here is effectively a bubble that you've got, which is correct, the rents were below market value, and you've had nice landlords that were not raising the rent. An investor comes in, buys the property with the full intention of developing it for a profit, which does benefit our community, but then it has a sudden impact. So what is needed here is a way to smoothen that bubble, to make it so that the impact neither falls so dramatically on the tenant or dramatically falls on the landlord. There was an accusation here about the data, and sure, it's not perfect. I think what Bart and I, and what also the other subcommittee, what's happening with this process is to give a good overview to the city council so that we can explore the matter further. And those are things that they'll want to take on, and they'll probably come back to us and say, yeah, we want more data. And so that's all part of the process. So I think that's why this idea of a rent review board and bringing a common understanding is a good thing to do. So.
Okay. Kathy, did you want to say?
Well, I guess I'm kind of losing track of where we're going with this. But, still I hear this kind of reaction to rent control. We're not doing rent control. It's not a way to, set a certain amount of increase that would be across the board for all landlords. Each rent review process would be an individual process that would take into consideration the circumstances of the landlord and the tenant. So that is what makes it different from being rent control, even though the decision may ultimately be binding. Alameda County, the city of Alameda had like a three-tiered process, and depending on where you were in the process, it would be binding or non-binding. But it's up to the individual tenant or the landlord to bring the process to review by the board. So there's nothing forcing anybody individually to go into the process. And as far as further discussion, I'm not sure what Jeff was saying. Like, we tried to have special meetings before, and it's really difficult to find additional space to do that. So I want to stay on schedule and bring this to the City Council at their September 19th meeting. Margie and I will go back and take into consideration the comments we've gotten tonight and the ones that we've gotten through email, and try to work those into what we've developed. But again, we will bring all of the opinions as well as we can to the City Council that we've heard, and it'll be up to them to, direct us as far as our next steps go.
Bart, do you want to say?
Yeah. I guess one thing, I've been listening very carefully to what people have said, and I'm hearing things that I think people need to hear from each other. I think that there's pain on both sides of this issue, and that's very clear. I agree that sometimes median numbers are not that helpful because they don't necessarily take into account all the different circumstances that might be in action. I have to rely on the county not being wrong, but I think it's kind of irrelevant anyway at this point, because what we're talking about is putting in place. Now, wait a minute. If you're going to shake your head and walk off.
I get 2 minutes. You get
I'm a commissioner. That's my
Okay,
job.
okay, that's...
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, I do wish people would have stayed because I would like to express the fact that we are hearing you, and I have a question myself about the issue of going with something binding as a first step. It seems to me that tenants do need a recourse, that having a rent review process in place at least offers tenants a way of communicating effectively with landlords and having some support in that process. I have seen in other jurisdictions that has worked, that people, when they hear each other, actually are able often to find reasonable solutions. Because there's a lot we don't know about who's who and what's what and who owns what in the city, I think having a rent review process would be a way of collecting information, a way of getting to know what's going on, and a way of having a relationship with landlords and the city and tenants. And my suggestion would be that we begin not with a binding process, but with a rent review process. And if that process is unsuccessful, council may have to look at it and evaluate it. But I think to go with a binding process right now is to ignore the fact that, people have issues that need to be expressed. That, yes, sometimes tenants don't understand why landlords are in a bind, and sometimes landlords don't understand why tenants are in a bind. This is a city where actually we can talk to each other. We're small and we are able to communicate with each other, and we've often been able to find solutions to problems where it seemed like people were completely polarized. We've often been able to find ways through that. I think putting a process in place that allows us to communicate more effectively would be a step in that direction. And I would like people to feel comfortable with that process. I would like it to be, under certain circumstances, a mandatory process, but not with a mandatory outcome. And I think that perhaps is a way of also saying to the landlords, let's try to work together, let's try to work this out, let's try to solve the problem before we resort to a heavy-handed solution.
Okay, Roman, do you?
We've heard a lot of people speak today on this matter, and I would like a little bit more time to think about this and go over my notes before we were to jump into a heavy-handed thing. And I agree with you, Bart, saying that we should do a trial to see this rent review process and see if we can work it out just by talking. And I would be leaning towards keeping this a short process, not, a few years and maybe later, but like a 3-month, a hard limit, 3, 4, something where we can evaluate it afterwards or immediately. And if there's an issue, which this seems to be a big issue for all of Albany, we can, make the changes fast enough. So I would be leaning towards having a non-binding process for a short amount of time to before we moved forward with anything binding.
So what I wanted to add with this is, I think you've done a very good job of presenting some options. I'm uncomfortable with delaying this process any longer. So what I would like to move, this is a motion, so I would like to move that we submit this to the city council and ask them to make a recommendation of what option they want us to pursue, or if they want more information on this. But I feel like this is ready to go. I don't think the commission needs to decide what option is going to be, because ultimately that's going to be their decision. So I think we should, and that's my motion.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Okay, there's a second. So now we're going to discuss this motion.
Well, can I?
Yes, please.
The problem with submitting this at this point is that the suggestions here are the suggestions of the subcommittee. And at least around this issue of binding, which is a very central issue, some of us are not in agreement with that recommendation. If we submitted this, I would like it to reflect the fact that that the committee is not in agreement necessarily.
Well, do you want to do an amendment to reflect that it would be a non-binding process? I mean,
Well, that would be my preference. I don't know that it would be your preference. Maybe we need to take a vote on that and see, and be able to give the council that information.
And I guess where I would backtrack a little bit on this is I don't think we're ready to have that vote. I'm just kind of taking your input and going with it. Now, we've got 10 minutes left in our extension. So the question is, I think, if we were to extend this again to 11, would we be able to settle the issue? Or do you prefer to go to another night to settle this? And it's going to be another month. That's my issue. We only meet once a month. So if we say, well, we can't decide, because ultimately it's going to be the council's decision anyway.
Yeah, but the council should be informed by our views.
Right, but do we want to wait another month because we can't agree on whether it's binding or not?
well,
I don't think it has to be just binding or non-binding. Alameda, the city of Alameda had like a 3-tiered process, and depending on where you were in the process, it could ultimately be binding. But as you move through the 3-tiered process, there were part of it was non-binding. So we could look more closely at the Alameda process and incorporate that.
well, okay, the only comment I would have is that looking at programs that were non-binding, there was a measure of success in those programs, and from what we were told, it was because the landlords didn't want rent control. So they were, it would be a hearing where the outcome was non-binding. However, the landlord would agree that it would be binding because they didn't want rent control to be enforced. I don't know if that explains what was going on.
I think I have an option. If this would, Isabel may best be answering this question. If we could vote on giving our recommendation on a non-binding recommendation to the council tonight, and then put on a future agenda for next month, a binding agreement. So we have one non-binding recommendation going to the council now, so we don't have to wait, and have a binding one in discussion. So if it doesn't work, we're already, a step ahead. We're looking towards the future. Would that be possible?
I think so. I don't see any reason. We would say that essentially that you're going to continue the dialogue among yourselves and with members of the public at future meetings.
Okay, so let me just back up. There's a motion to submit this report to the city council. So you would be making an amendment to that motion.
To non-binding.
And I accept that amendment.
So you accept it as a friendly amendment, so we're not going to vote on it?
No,
Okay.
we're going to vote on passing it with the recommendation that, or sending it to the commission with the recommendation they look at the non-binding option, and we'll have a further discussion on binding.
Okay, does everyone understand what we would be voting on?
I can live with that.
Well, we could we could change this so that it's ready for the September 19th meeting that has both a non-binding and a binding option.
Well, I think the commission is saying, I think what the other commissioners are saying, though, is to go forward right now with the non-binding and do more research on a binding. That's what I hear people saying.
And let me just point out that if we look at the input we've gotten from the community, the binding part of it is what's going to create the most controversy. And so if we can move forward with the non-binding, then we can get something done. If we insist on binding, I think it's going to prolong the process. And so that's what, so I would say we vote on the measure. I mean, if enough people are in disagreement, then it won't pass, and we'll leave here going on to the next meeting.
And if I may, Kathy, you are on the subcommittee. So between next month, you can add any more thoughts and, better inform us as to how we can...
For our next meeting.
For our next meeting on the binding one.
But it won't be for the city council.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think how does this work as far as potential opportunity for rent increases if we only submit a non-binding to the city council on the 19th.
If I may, ideally, they would, the council would vote upon it, and then we would see it in action, rather than on paper how it works.
I'm sorry, and I think we're getting confused. That's the moratorium.
Yeah.
The
Right.
moratorium will address that
What if the
issue.
moratorium doesn't pass?
That's.
Well, if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. That's like.
If the moratorium doesn't pass, then I don't see how a binding resolution is going to pass.
So we would be moving it forward to the city council, suggesting a non-binding as the option. That's what's on the table right now for us to
Right.
vote on.
And let's hurry up and vote, because we got 5
Okay,
minutes.
okay, so are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, it passes. So, okay, so at the next meeting, I want to talk about the agenda for the next meeting. We would be talking about, can you clarify for us what you want us to do? Because I'm not sure.
We would, or, yeah. I'm guessing we would move on to future agendas, and I would propose that we would look at a binding rent review board.
Yes, Bart.
It's likely that the council is going to send us back to do more work. I think it's probably unlikely that the council is going to say, fine, go away, and we're ready now. So I don't think this is a big problem, but I do think we would, what I would see the outcome of that vote being is that we would present this to the council saying the majority voted for a non-binding model. We will also provide you with more information about potential binding, but for now, our recommendation is non-binding. That's what we decided.
Okay, yes.
And I just want to point out, that doesn't mean we're opposed to a binding.
No.
It just means non-binding is something we can go forward with. And
Well, the other issue is another issue. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, all right. So is there any further business before the commission?
I just wanted to clarify with respect to the city council meeting, the suggestion of a September 19th council meeting. I can't make that commitment to you this evening.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for members of the public that the best way to stay on top of this is to sign up for an e-notify email. We have one now for this issue. And anytime there's a meeting, anytime there's a public meeting on this issue, whether it's this commission or the city council, we will send out an email announcement well in advance of that meeting, so everybody has the information. And it will be the agenda materials will then be on the webpage as the meeting date approaches.
Can I suggest one more future agenda?
Yes, please.
A lot of the mentions today was the limited supply of housing.
Yeah, we should.
So if we can look into, more housing for Albany. And
Okay, can I, you really need to look at the housing element, because that really gets into it. And we're not going to rework the wheel here. So I think we can look into it, but it's been looked into. I mean, I just want you to be aware that it's been done, and yes.
Well, I think that the Diverse Housing Group has been looking into this. We haven't had a chance to hear from them. There is this Alameda County bond measure that's being proposed, which would provide some money for Albany for affordable housing. We're not built. We may not be built up as far as we're built out, and there may be room, and there may be incentives that would be possible for developing affordable housing. And I think it is appropriate for us to look at that. I would support that for future agenda.
I'm sorry, but wouldn't that be something that has to be added to our work plan?
It would.
Or is that-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
we'd
because
have-
we're talking about the agenda for next
We're voting
month,
for
and I think
next month.
that's largely going to be dictated by the city council,
I
by
think-
what they come back with.
I think that one thing is that might be more under the purvey of the planning and zoning to develop an affordable housing effort. And also, I think we really need to focus on these two items right now before we introduce something new.
I took that in consideration, my wanting to putting on the future agendas, because if we get too overwhelmed, we can always vote to postpone it, but we will always have that option available for every meeting. whether we have enough time or if we feel comfortable going forth with it.
Okay, so, but we would have to add it to the work plan, correct? So that
Yes,
means,
it's really a different process. And at this point, I think you have enough on your plate. And but the thing about adding agenda items on the agenda, just in case, is that, you know, it can, if you're not prepared, if there's no staff report, then it can create other issues.
I mean, one thing we could talk about is the Alameda County Housing Bond. Because that's going to be on the ballot, and I think we could talk about what we could do to get it passed, because it's over $2 million for the city of Albany for affordable housing.
Yeah, it's going to be on the city council's agenda on the 19th. Linda Gardner is.
I just want to remind everyone that our 30 minutes has passed.
And I just wanted to add also as to how people can stay up to date on this issue is that there's some green slips that describe basically how people can stay involved and how they can access information on the website. So.
Yeah. And I'd like to reiterate what people have been saying all along, that we really appreciate your participation in exercising your First Amendment right to free speech.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you.